The CEO was not sleeping. She was hunting. Victoria Sterling sat motionless in Conference Room C on the 53rd floor of Sterling Tower, her head resting on the polished mahogany table, her breathing deliberately slow and rhythmic. Through barely closed eyelids, she watched the reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows that wrapped around the room like a glass cage suspended above Manhattan. The city sprawled below in a carpet of lights, millions of lives unfolding in the darkness, none of them aware that in this glass tower, a woman worth $4.7 billion was playing possum for a janitor. She had learned this trick from her father, Harold Sterling, the man who had built this company from nothing more than a second mortgage and an iron will. He had taught her that true character only revealed itself when people believed they were alone. Board members who smiled in daylight meetings showed their real faces in empty hallways. Executives who praised collaboration sabotaged rivals when the lights went down. And Victoria, who had spent 15 years climbing from junior analyst to CEO, had made it her business to know exactly who people were when the performance ended. Tonight, she was testing the night janitor. His name was Garrett Calloway, according to the employee database. 34 years old, employed for 8 months through the contracted cleaning service, consistently punctual, no disciplinary issues. The kind of anonymous efficiency that corporate systems loved and corporate leadership ignored. Victoria had never spoken to him, had never really looked at him until last week when Thomas Reeves, her head of security, mentioned something unusual during their weekly briefing. The night janitor on 53 asked about the mechanical room access logs, wanted to know why certain systems were running during off hours when the floors were supposed to be empty. Most CEOs would have dismissed it. Victoria had built her career on not dismissing anything. She had asked Thomas what he told the man, that it was not his concern, that he should focus on his job, and did he? Thomas had hesitated before answering. He did his job, but he kept looking, not in a suspicious way, more like concern. The word had stayed with her for 3 days, circling her thoughts like a vulture over carrion. In a building full of people paid to care about quarterly earnings and shareholder value, the janitor was concerned about systems running in empty spaces. It was either remarkably naive or remarkably observant. Victoria needed to know which. So tonight she had stayed late, dismissed her assistant, turned off most of the lights, positioned herself in the conference room with the glass walls where anyone passing by could see her, and she had waited. The soft squeak of cartwheels announced his arrival at exactly 2:47 in the morning. On schedule. Predictable. Victoria controlled her breathing, kept her face relaxed, her body still. Through the reflection, she watched him approach. Garrett Calloway moved with the economical grace of someone who had learned to navigate spaces without disturbing them. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, lean in a way that suggested hard labor rather than gym memberships. His hair was dark brown, slightly disheveled in need of a trim. His hands, even from this distance, looked weathered and callous, the hands of a man who had spent years working with tools and timber and machinery. His uniform was clean but worn, the Sterling Industries logo fading on the chest pocket like a memory losing its grip. He pushed his cart with one hand, the other holding a spray bottle with the casual competence of long practice. He paused outside the conference room, noticing her through the glass wall. Victoria watched his reflection as he stood there perfectly still, deciding what to do. The easy choice would be to move on, come back later when the room was empty. That was what most people would do. Avoid the complication of a sleeping executive. Pretend you never saw anything. Clock your hours and go home. Instead, he carefully opened the door. The quiet click of the latch seemed loud in the silence. Garrett entered slowly, his movements even more careful now, clearly trying not to wake her. Victoria maintained her facade of sleep, tracking his approach through the window's reflection and the subtle awareness of his presence in the room. He did not start cleaning immediately. She heard him set down the spray bottle, heard the soft rustle of fabric. Then she felt it, the weight of something being draped gently across her shoulders. A jacket, his jacket, worn denim still warm from his body, smelling faintly of laundry detergent and honest work, and something else she could not quite identify. Care, perhaps. The scent of someone who still believed in small kindnesses. What happened next would stay with Victoria for the rest of her life. His voice came barely above a whisper, so quiet she almost missed it. Words meant for no one in this room. Words meant for a ghost. I am sorry I could not keep you warm, but I can keep her warm, I promise. No one should be alone in the cold. Not again. Never again. The words hit her like a physical blow. There was something in his tone that went beyond sadness, beyond grief. It was a vow carved into bone, a promise that had become the architecture of his entire existence. He was not talking to her. He was talking to someone who was not there anymore, someone he had failed to protect. Victoria's carefully maintained composure nearly cracked. She wanted to open her eyes, wanted to demand an explanation, wanted to understand what tragedy had carved that kind of promise into a man's soul. But she held still, barely breathing, as Garrett moved away. She heard him cleaning, the soft spray of solution, the gentle wipe of cloth on glass, the careful attention to detail that suggested he took pride in work that most people considered beneath notice. He worked around her without making a sound, treating her presence with a respect that felt almost protective, like she was something fragile, like she mattered. 15 minutes later, he was gone. The conference room gleamed, the jacket remained on her shoulders. Victoria sat up slowly, her heart beating harder than it had during any hostile takeover negotiation. She pulled the jacket closer, feeling the worn fabric, the weight of it, the lingering warmth. In the pocket, she found a small photograph bent at the corners from being carried close to someone's heart for too long. A woman with kind eyes and a little girl with ribbons in her hair. On the back, written in careful print, Emma and Lily Main, 2019. 5 years ago. Victoria stared at the photo, at the woman who was clearly gone, at the child who would be older now, and something shifted in her chest, something uncomfortable and unfamiliar, something that felt dangerously close to recognition. She had built her empire on reading people, on understanding motivation, on knowing exactly what drove human behavior. She understood greed. She understood ambition. She understood fear and pride and the desperate hunger for success. But this quiet vow to a ghost, this promise to protect strangers from a cold, he could not protect someone else from this. She did not understand at all. Victoria stood still, holding the jacket, and walked to the window. Below, the city sprawled in a carpet of lights. Millions of people living millions of stories she would never know. Somewhere down there, Garrett Calloway was probably heading home to his daughter, carrying the weight of a promise that seemed to govern his entire life. And up here in her glass tower, Victoria realized she had just discovered something far more valuable than efficiency ratings or clean floors. She had discovered someone who still believed in promises. The elevator doors opened on the 48th floor, and Garrett pushed his cart into the corridor that connected the main building to the auxiliary systems wing. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional pallor that made 3 in the morning feel like the loneliest hour in the world. Frank Kowalski was waiting at the security desk, a paperback novel open on the counter in front of him, a steaming cup of coffee sending curls of vapor into the recycled air. At 62, Frank had the weathered solidity of a man who had seen enough of the world to know its weight and had decided to carry it anyway. His hair had gone white years ago, his frame still large but beginning to curve under the accumulation of decades. He had been a police officer in Chicago for 20 years before coming to Sterling Tower, and he had been guarding this building for another 20 since. Some nights Garrett thought Frank knew more about what happened in these halls than anyone who actually worked here. Frank looked up as Garrett approached, his eyes crinkling with something that was not quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. How was the hunt tonight? Garrett parked his cart and dropped into the chair across from the security desk, a ritual they had developed over 8 months of overlapping shifts. Like every other night, floors get dirty, I clean them. World keeps spinning. Frank closed his book, marking his place with a grocery receipt. You have that look again. The one that says you saw something you were not supposed to see. Garrett accepted the cup of coffee Frank pushed across the counter, wrapping his calloused hands around the warmth. The auxiliary power system on 51. Third night this week, it has been running hot. No one is supposed to be in this building after 10, but something is drawing power up there. Something that does not show up on any work orders I have seen. Frank leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking in protest. You told Reeves about this. Told him 2 weeks ago. He said it was not my concern, said I should focus on my job and stop asking questions above my pay grade. And let me guess, you did not stop asking. Garrett took a long sip of coffee, feeling the heat spread through his chest. 20 years guarding this building, Frank. You ever see systems running in empty spaces like that? Regular as clockwork, same nights every week. Frank was quiet for a moment, his expression shifting into something more serious. In my experience, when something happens on a schedule, someone put it on that schedule. Machines do not decide to work late on their own. The question is whether you want to know who is behind it badly enough to deal with what knowing might cost you. Garrett thought about Lily sleeping in their small apartment in Queens with Maria Santos from next door keeping watch. Thought about the promise he had made 3 years ago in a homeless shelter, standing in front of strangers with nothing left to lose. Thought about Emma alone on that frozen road calling a phone he could not answer. I cannot look away from things that do not add up. Not anymore. Frank nodded slowly, something like respect settling into the lines of his face. I know. It is why I like you, Calloway. Most people learn to ignore what is inconvenient. You never did. Garrett finished his coffee and stood reaching for his cart. My father used to say that the measure of a man was not what he did when people were watching. It was what he did when he thought no one would ever know. Frank picked up his book again, but his eyes stayed on Garrett. Smart man, your father. He was a carpenter, built houses for 40 years, never cheated a customer, never cut a corner, never blamed anyone else when something went wrong. And what happened to him? Lost the business in the recession, lost the house 6 months later, died of a heart attack the year after that trying to pay off debts that were not even his fault. Garrett pushed his cart toward the elevator, then paused, looking back at the old security guard. Frank, you have been in this building longer than almost anyone. If something was wrong here, something big, would you want to know? Frank's answer came without hesitation. I spent 20 years as a cop watching people get away with things because nobody wanted to rock the boat. 3 of my partners took money from drug dealers, and I was the only one who reported it. You know what they called me after that, A-rat? My wife left because the pressure got too heavy. My son did not speak to me for a decade. But I could look at myself in the mirror every morning, and that had to be enough. And now my son calls me every week. He is 35, works as a federal prosecutor. Last month he told me he finally understood why I did what I did. Took him 25 years, but he got there. Frank turned back to his book, but his voice carried one last piece of advice. The dangerous ones are not the people who shout. They are the ones who stay quiet and wait. Remember that, Calloway. Whatever you are looking at up there, someone does not want it seen. The morning came too quickly. Gray light filtering through the windows of Victoria's corner office like an interrogation lamp. She had not gone home, had not slept, had spent the hours since the conference room sitting at her desk, staring at the photograph from Garrett's jacket, and trying to understand why it had unsettled her so completely. She called Thomas Reeves at 7:30 before the building filled with employees who measured their worth in coffee consumption and email response times. I need everything you can find on Garrett Calloway. The night janitor. Where he came from, why he is here, what he was before this. Thomas appeared in her doorway 20 minutes later, his expression already guarded. With respect, Ms. Sterling, he is a contract employee. His background check was clean. He does his job. That is all we need to know. No, that is all we bothered to know. There is a difference. She watched Thomas process this, saw the moment he decided to take her seriously. He pulled out his phone, accessing the personnel files. Garrett Calloway, hired 8 months ago through the standard service company we contract with. Previous employment was construction work in Maine. Some automotive repair, general maintenance, no college degree. References checked out. Lives in a rent-controlled apartment in Queens with his 6-year-old daughter. Single father, wife deceased. How did she die? Thomas looked up, surprised by the question. I do not have that information. We do not typically dig that deep for janitorial staff. Then dig deeper. I want to know everything about this man by the end of the day. After Thomas left, Victoria turned to her window and watched the city wake up below. She was 45 years old. She had been CEO of Sterling Industries for 8 years, had guided the company through 2 recessions and 3 hostile takeover attempts, had built a reputation as one of the most formidable executives of her generation. She had sacrificed her marriage for this company, had chosen boardrooms over nurseries, had accepted loneliness as the price of power. And now a janitor with a dead wife and a worn jacket had somehow gotten under her skin in a way that no competitor, no board member, no market crash ever had. Her phone buzzed. Marcus Thornton, her COO, reminding her about the Titan Industries meeting at 10. The acquisition was entering its final phase, a $3.2 billion deal that would double their market share and cement her legacy. She had spent 18 months engineering. This merger had outmaneuvered three competitor bids, had negotiated terms that would make her board members weep with joy when the announcement went public next month. But as she gathered her files and prepared for the meeting, she kept thinking about the photograph in her desk drawer, about Emma and Lily in Maine, about a man who noticed systems running when buildings should be empty and could not look away because a promise he had made to a ghost would not let him. The merger meeting lasted 4 hours. Lawyers and accountants filled two conference rooms reviewing final documentation, confirming compliance standards, ensuring every clause of the agreement was ironclad. Victoria presided over it all with her usual precision, catching discrepancies that others missed, pushing back on language that seemed too vague, demanding clarity where others were willing to accept ambiguity. Richard Ashford, her CFO, presented the financial models with the smooth confidence of a man who had been doing this for 14 years. 52 years old, silver-haired, impeccably dressed Richard had the kind of patrician charm that made shareholders feel safe and competitors feel nervous. He had helped Sterling Industries survive the 2008 crisis, had restructured their debt portfolio during the pandemic, had been Victoria's most trusted financial advisor since before she became CEO. The numbers look solid. 3 years to full integration, 12% projected return by year 5. This is exactly the kind of strategic acquisition that positions us for the next decade. Marcus Thornton nodded in agreement, his expression carefully neutral. He had been with Victoria for 10 years, had risen through the ranks beside her, had become the closest thing she had to an ally in the executive suite. At 48, Marcus had the polished efficiency of a Wharton MBA combined with the political instincts of someone who had learned to navigate corporate hierarchies without accumulating enemies. He was the only person in the room Victoria called by his first name. After the meeting, she caught Marcus in the hallway. "You have been over the models. Anything that concerns you? Any numbers that do not quite fit?" Marcus shook his head. "I have checked everything 3 times. This deal is clean. We have nothing to worry about." Victoria wanted to believe him, wanted to accept the convenient answer and move forward with the biggest acquisition of her career. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she kept hearing Garrett Calloway's voice in the darkness, whispering promises to someone who was not there. "If something was wrong, would you tell me? Even if telling me made everything more complicated?" Marcus met her eyes, his expression open and sincere. "Victoria, I have been with you for a decade. When have I ever held back bad news?" She nodded, letting the moment pass. But as she walked back to her office, she could not shake the feeling that she was missing something. Something important. Something that had been hiding in plain sight while everyone around her learned to look away. The file on Garrett Calloway arrived on her desk at 6 that evening, thick enough to suggest that Thomas had taken her instructions seriously. Victoria closed her door, dimmed her lights, and began to read. What she found was a tragedy in 3 acts. Act 1 was a career. Garrett Calloway had spent 10 years working construction in Maine, rising from apprentice to journeyman to foreman by the time he was 28. He had supervised crews of 15 men, had earned a reputation for spotting problems before they became catastrophes, had once shut down an entire job site because he noticed a hairline crack in a steel beam on the 12th floor of a building under construction. The contractor had screamed about deadlines and penalty fees. 2 days later, an engineer confirmed that the beam would have collapsed under the weight of the concrete they were planning to pour. Garrett had saved at least 8 lives that day. Act 2 was a fall. The same contractor, who had been humiliated by Garrett's caution, found ways to retaliate. Dangerous assignments, impossible deadlines. The kind of subtle persecution that could not be proven but could definitely be felt. On a February afternoon 3 years ago, Garrett was working on scaffolding 8 stories up when something went wrong. The official report blamed high winds and equipment failure. The unofficial truth was that everyone on that site knew the scaffolding had not been properly secured, and everyone knew why. Garrett fell 80 feet. He broke 3 vertebrae in his lower back. He spent 3 months in a hospital learning how to walk again. Act 3 was a death. Emma Calloway, 31 years old, had been driving to visit her husband on a night when black ice covered the roads outside Portland. Garrett was unconscious from pain medication, sleeping through the first peaceful rest he had found in weeks of agony. Emma called him 3 times from the car, trying to let him know she was on her way. He never answered. She lost control of her car on Route 26, slid across the center line, struck a tree. The coroner estimated she had been alive for almost an hour after the impact, trapped in the wreckage alone, in temperatures that dropped to 12 degrees below zero. By the time anyone found her, she had been dead for 6 hours. Victoria set down the file and stared at the wall of her office, at the photographs of her father, and the awards from business magazines, and the framed certificates that documented her ascent. She thought about Garrett Calloway waking up in a hospital bed to learn that his wife had died alone in the cold while he slept, and she understood finally why he whispered promises to ghosts. The rest of the file documented the aftermath: medical bills totaling over $180,000, funeral expenses, zero income for months while Garrett struggled through rehabilitation. He lost their house within 6 months. He and Lily, then 3 years old, spent 4 months in a homeless shelter in Portland before Garrett managed to find work and scrape together enough for a security deposit on the cheapest apartment he could find in Queens. There was a note from a social worker who had observed him during those months at the shelter. Garrett Calloway demonstrates an almost pathological commitment to helping others, often at the expense of his own well-being. He has been observed giving away his own meals and clothing to other residents, particularly those with children. Recommend monitoring for self-destructive tendencies masked as altruism. And there was a statement from the shelter director included in the file like an afterthought. During a group meeting, Mr. Calloway stood and made what he called a promise to his late wife. He vowed that he would never let anyone suffer alone if he could prevent it, that he would pay attention when others looked away, that he would care even when caring cost him. Several other residents were moved to tears. I have worked in this field for 20 years, and I have never seen someone express such raw and genuine commitment to a principle. Victoria closed the file and sat in the darkness of her office thinking about promises. About the ones she had made and the ones she had broken. About her father who had built this company on integrity and passed it to her with the expectation that she would protect what mattered. About her mother who had died believing Victoria was the only one who would not let the company become something they hated. About all the compromises she had made along the way, all the small surrenders she had justified as necessary, all the times she had chosen convenience over conviction and told herself it was just business. A janitor who gave his jacket to strangers and whispered promises to ghosts had somehow exposed every crack in the armor she had spent 45 years constructing. She reached for her phone and called Thomas Reeves. I need you to pull the power usage reports for the building mechanicals. Everything from the past 6 months. Focus on floors 48 through 51. The reports arrived at 7 the next morning, delivered by a bleary-eyed Thomas, who had clearly been up all night compiling data. Victoria spread them across her desk, comparing power usage against occupancy schedules, against work orders, against the building's automated systems. At first, nothing looked unusual. Normal fluctuations, expected variance, the kind of minor discrepancies that existed in any large building. But then she noticed a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday night between midnight and 4 in the morning, power usage on floors 48 through 51 spiked by nearly 30%. Not enough to trigger any alarms, not enough to seem suspicious if you were not looking for it, but consistent, regular, deliberate. What is on those floors? Thomas checked his notes. 48 is mostly storage and auxiliary server space. 49 and 50 are being renovated for the post-merger expansion. 51 is mechanical systems and building infrastructure. Who has access after hours during the day? Construction crews working on the renovation. At night, just security and maintenance, and apparently someone else who does not appear on any approved access lists. Victoria stared at the numbers, feeling the first stirrings of something that might have been dread. Schedule an inspection. Tonight, I want to see what is happening in my building when everyone thinks no one is watching. She paused, making a decision that surprised even herself. And I want Garrett Calloway there. He noticed this before anyone else did. I want to know what else he might see. The park in Queens sat at the corner of 43rd Street and 10th Avenue, a small green rectangle surrounded by brick buildings and corner bodegas, and the accumulated history of a neighborhood that had seen better days and worse ones and kept going regardless. Victoria arrived in a taxi at 4 in the afternoon, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, carrying none of the armor that protected her in boardrooms and shareholder meetings. She found Garrett sitting on a bench near the climbing structure, watching a small girl navigate the monkey bars with an intensity that suggested the fate of the world depended on her reaching the other side. Lily Calloway was 7 years old in the photograph Victoria had found in Garrett's jacket, but she was 6 now, which meant the picture had been taken before Emma died. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's determined expression, and she moved through the playground equipment with the careful confidence of a child who had learned early that the world could be trusted only so far. Victoria approached the bench and watched Garrett notice her. Watched the moment of recognition cross his face, followed by the realization that she had never actually been asleep. You were not sleeping. Both nights. I was testing you. Garrett accepted this information without visible reaction, though something shifted in his eyes. Testing me for what? To see who you are when you think no one is watching. To understand what kind of person makes promises like the one you made. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to Lily as she completed her crossing and jumped down from the monkey bars with a triumphant shout. You went through my jacket, found the picture. Victoria pulled the photograph from her pocket and held it out to him. I needed to understand the things you whispered in that conference room, the promises you were making to someone who was not there. I needed to know who she was and why you are still talking to her 3 years later. Garrett took the photograph, his calloused fingers gentle on the worn edges. Emma wanted me to be better than I was, stronger than I felt. She believed I could be the kind of man who noticed when things were wrong and did something about it. After she died, after everything fell apart, keeping that promise was the only thing I had left. Lily came running over, her face flushed with triumph, her sneakers leaving prints in the dirt. Daddy, I made it all the way across without stopping. Did you see Garrett's entire demeanor transform, the careful guardedness falling away like a mask he had forgotten he was wearing? I saw everything, sweetheart. You were amazing. Lily noticed Victoria for the first time studying her with the frank curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to hide her assessments. You are really tall. Are you wearing high heels? Mrs. Martinez at school says high heels hurt your feet, but they make you look important. Victoria found herself smiling a real smile, the kind she had almost forgotten she could produce. No high heels today. I decided to be comfortable instead. That is smart. Daddy says comfortable is better than fancy any day. Your daddy sounds like a wise man. Lily nodded with absolute conviction. He is the wisest person I know. He notices everything, even the things nobody else sees. Victoria looked at Garrett, who was watching his daughter with an expression that contained entire volumes of love and fear and hope. That is actually why I am here, Lily, because your daddy noticed something important and I need his help to understand what it means. They walked to a small bodega on the corner, the kind of place that sold ice cream and empanadas and lottery tickets to people who could not afford to dream, but did anyway. Lily got chocolate with rainbow sprinkles and immediately began interrogating Victoria about her job, her apartment, whether she had any pets, whether she liked butterflies because Lily was reading a book about butterflies and they were the most beautiful things in the whole world. Victoria answered each question with the same attention she brought to board meetings, recognizing that this small girl was conducting her own form of due diligence. When Lily ran off to chase a pigeon, Garrett turned to Victoria with something that might have been gratitude. Most adults treat her like an inconvenience, something to be tolerated until the real conversation can happen. You actually listen to her. She is remarkable. Observant and direct and completely unafraid to ask for what she wants to know. She reminds me of myself at that age before I learned that asking questions could be dangerous. What changed? Victoria watched Lily attempting to convince a skeptical pigeon that she meant no harm. I learned that the questions worth asking were the ones people did not want to answer. And I learned that asking them anyway was the only way to find out what was really happening. Garrett was quiet for a moment, processing. You did not come all the way to Queens just to return my jacket and meet my daughter. No, I came because I think you saw something in my building that everyone else missed. Systems running when they should not be running. Power consumption that does not match any authorized activity. And I came because I need to know if you are willing to help me understand what it means. What makes you think I know anything about corporate power consumption? I am a janitor. I clean floors for a living. You are a former construction foreman who shut down a job site because you noticed a crack that a team of engineers missed. You spent 10 years building things and learning how they work. And you have spent 8 months in my building watching and cleaning and paying attention to details that everyone else considers beneath notice. Garrett looked at his daughter, then back at Victoria. If I help you, if I get involved in whatever this is, my only condition is that Lily stays protected. Whatever we find, whatever happens, she cannot be touched by it. She has already lost her mother. She cannot lose anything else. Victoria met his eyes, recognizing the iron beneath the words. Agreed, your daughter stays out of it completely. Then what do you need from me tomorrow night? Thursday. That is when the power consumption spikes. I am conducting an inspection of the affected floors, and I want you there. I want your eyes on everything we find. Garrett nodded slowly in some internal calculation reaching its conclusion. I get off my regular shift at 7. My neighbor Maria can stay with Lily until I get back. What time do you want me on 5111? After the building empties out. After whoever is using that power thinks no one is watching. They walked back to the playground where Lily had given up on the pigeon and was now attempting to climb a tree that clearly had not been designed for climbing. Garrett helped her down with the patient efficiency of a father who had done this 100 times before, and Victoria found herself watching them with something that felt uncomfortably like envy. She had chosen a different path, had decided that children were incompatible with the kind of career she wanted to build, had accepted loneliness as the price of power and told herself it was worth paying. But watching Garrett with his daughter, seeing the way his entire world contracted to the size of one small girl with ribbons in her hair, she wondered for the first time if the accounting had been accurate. Lily tugged on her father's hand, her energy finally beginning to fade. Daddy, can we go home now? I am tired and I want to show you the picture I drew of butterflies. In a minute, sweetheart. Garrett turned to Victoria one last time. Ms. Sterling, whatever we find tomorrow night, I need you to understand something. I cannot look away from problems just because looking at them makes people uncomfortable. That is not how I am built anymore. If there is something wrong in your building, I will tell you about it, even if the truth is worse than not knowing. Victoria extended her hand and Garrett shook it with a grip that was firm without being aggressive. I am counting on exactly that. She watched them walk away, Garrett carrying Lily on his shoulders, now both of them silhouette against the evening light. A father and daughter who had survived the worst thing imaginable and were still standing, still keeping promises, still paying attention to the world even when the world was not paying attention back. Victoria thought about her father, about the company he had built, about the legacy he had entrusted to her. She thought about her mother dying slowly in a hospital bed, extracting promises about what kind of leader Victoria would become. She thought about all the years she had spent climbing, achieving, accumulating power and influence, and the respect of people who would abandon her the moment she stopped being useful. And she thought about a janitor who gave his jacket to strangers and whispered promises to ghosts, who noticed things that everyone else had learned to ignore, who could not look away from problems because a dead wife and a living daughter and an unbreakable vow would not let him. Tomorrow night, she would find out what was hiding in the shadows of her own building. Tomorrow night, she would learn whether the success she had spent her life building was real or just an elaborate performance staged over a foundation of lies. But tonight, walking back through Queens to find a taxi that would return her to Manhattan, Victoria Sterling felt something she had not felt in years. Something that might have been hope. Something that might have been the first stirring of a conscience she had thought she had permanently silenced. She thought about a promise she had made to her father before he died, standing in the same city, looking up at the building that bore their name. She had promised to run the company the way he had built it, with integrity that mattered more than profit, with truth that could not be purchased or buried or explained away. She had been breaking that promise for years, one small compromise at a time. But maybe with the help of a man who still believed in promises, she could start keeping it again. The night was waiting. The truth was hiding somewhere in those dark floors. And Victoria Sterling, CEO of a $4 billion empire, was going to find it with a janitor as her guide. Because sometimes the people who saw the most clearly were the ones who had nothing left to lose. The inspection began at 11 on Thursday night when the Sterling Tower had emptied of everyone except the ghosts that inhabited all buildings after dark. Victoria waited in the corridor on the 48th floor, dressed in clothes that suggested she had no intention of sitting behind a desk. Thomas Reeves stood beside her with two building engineers, their expressions tight with the particular tension of people who sensed they were about to discover something they would rather not know. Garrett arrived exactly on time, still wearing his janitor's uniform, pushing his cleaning cart, with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything. Frank Kowalski had joined them as well, his bulk filling the doorway of the security station, his eyes sharp with the kind of alertness that never fully dimmed, no matter how many years passed. The auxiliary server room on 48 confirmed what the power reports had suggested. Temperature readings showed the equipment running significantly hotter than normal processors engaged in calculations that had nothing to do with backup systems or routine maintenance. One of the engineers crouched beside a server rack, his face illuminated by the blue glow of diagnostic displays. Someone has been running distributed processing through these systems. Heavy computational work, the kind you would use for financial modeling or complex simulations. This is not backup activity. This is active work being performed without authorization. Victoria absorbed the information, her mind already racing through possibilities. What kind of financial modeling requires this level of processing power? The engineer shrugged, but the implications hung in the air like smoke. Acquisition analysis, risk assessment, the kind of number crunching you would do if you were trying to manipulate projections on a major deal. They moved to the 49th floor where construction materials and renovation equipment filled the corridors like obstacles in a maze. Victoria had authorized the expansion months ago, preparing office space for the post-merger integration that would follow the Titan acquisition. The work was supposed to be proceeding on schedule, and the regular reports from the construction supervisor suggested nothing unusual. Garrett stopped at a corner near the back of the floor, behind a sheet of plastic marked with demolition warnings. His attention had fixed on something at floor level, a detail so small that no one else had noticed it. This electrical outlet was installed recently. The housing is still white, no dust accumulation, no wear marks, and the wiring runs into the wall rather than out of it. Victoria moved closer, studying the outlet with new eyes. What does that mean? It means someone installed this to power something behind this wall, something that was not part of the original construction plans. Thomas signaled to the engineers, and together they carefully removed the plastic sheeting. Behind it, what should have been an exterior wall waiting for demolition was actually a false partition concealing a hidden space. The room measured perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, carved out of what had been planned as a storage area. It contained a desk, a computer setup, a small refrigerator, and a folding cot that suggested someone had spent considerable time here. Empty coffee cups and food wrappers littered the surface of the desk. A filing cabinet stood against one wall, its drawers slightly open. Frank let out a low whistle. Someone built themselves a secret office right under everyone's noses. Victoria approached the computer, her hands steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. The screen woke at her touch, revealing files and folders that should never have existed. Financial models for the Titan acquisition, but not the version she had approved. These projections showed different numbers, optimistic forecasts that painted Titan as far more valuable than any legitimate analysis would support. The filing cabinet contained physical documents that made the betrayal concrete, internal memos marked confidential, strategic plans that had never left the executive suite, communication records with an external company called Vanguard Holdings, their primary competitor, the firm that had tried 3 times to acquire Sterling Industries and failed. Victoria recognized the handwriting on several of the documents, recognized the signature at the bottom of payment authorization forms, recognized the careful, methodical approach to deception that characterized everything Richard Ashford did. Her CFO, the man she had trusted for 14 years, the man who had helped her father build this company and had stayed on to serve the daughter. He had been selling them out to their worst enemy while smiling in board meetings and assuring everyone the numbers were solid. Thomas was already reaching for his phone. "I am calling the authorities. This is evidence of securities fraud, corporate espionage, and probably a dozen other crimes I cannot name off the top of my head." Victoria stopped him with a raised hand. "Not yet. I want to know the full scope of this before we involve anyone outside this room. I want to know how deep the rot goes." She turned to Garrett, who had been examining the room with the same careful attention he brought to everything. "You noticed the outlet. You saw what the rest of us missed. What else do you see?" Garrett moved slowly through the space, his eyes cataloging details that others overlooked. "Whoever used this room spent a lot of time here. The cot has been slept on regularly. The mattress shows wear patterns. The coffee cups are from at least 3 different vendors, which suggests multiple visits over months rather than a single intensive period. And the computer has been accessed on a schedule probably the same nights the power consumption spiked. Tuesday and Thursday nights. Victoria's voice was flat, the tone of someone processing information that changed everything. Richard was here every Tuesday and Thursday building his case for betraying the company while the rest of us were home sleeping. Frank stepped forward, his experience as a former police officer evident in the way he approached the evidence. Ms. Sterling, in my experience, operations like this rarely involve just one person. Someone had to help him access the building systems without triggering alerts. Someone had to look the other way when questions were asked. Victoria thought about Marcus Thornton, about his assurances that the Titan deal was clean, about his 10 years of loyal service and his careful avoidance of anything that might rock the boat. She did not want to believe it, but the evidence in this room suggested that wanting and reality were very different things. The confrontation with Richard Ashford happened the next morning in Victoria's office, with security personnel stationed outside the door. Richard entered with his usual confidence, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit impeccable, his expression betraying nothing of the panic that must have been churning beneath the surface. "You wanted to see me urgently. Is there a problem with the Titan closing documents?" Victoria pushed the folder across her desk, the one containing photographs of the hidden office and printouts of the falsified financial models. "Explain these." Richard studied the contents with the calm of a man who had anticipated this moment and prepared for it. He took his time reviewing each document as if seeing them for the first time, his expression shifting from curiosity to something that might have been admiration. "You found the room. I wondered how long it would take. I must admit I expected it would be Thomas or one of the board members. I never imagined it would be traced back to an electrical outlet noticed by a janitor. So you admit it. You have been working with Vanguard Holdings to sabotage this acquisition." Richard leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs with the casual elegance of a man attending a garden party rather than facing the destruction of his career. "Victoria, do you really think a CFO with 14 years of experience would leave evidence this obvious by accident? Do you think I would build a secret office in a building full of security cameras without considering the possibility of discovery? What are you saying I am saying that you have found exactly what someone wanted you to find? The question you should be asking is not whether I am guilty. The question is who benefits from my removal." Victoria felt the ground shifting beneath her, the certainty she had carried into this meeting beginning to crack. "You are claiming you were set up. I am claiming that the situation is more complicated than it appears. And I am suggesting that before you destroy my reputation and career based on evidence conveniently discovered by a night janitor, you should ask your COO about a phone call he received at 2 in the morning the night before your inspection. Marcus. What does Marcus have to do with this?" Richard stood straightening his jacket with the precision of someone who had long ago learned that appearance mattered more than reality. "Ask him about the phone number registered to his wife. Ask him why he assured you the deal was clean when he knew it was not. And ask yourself why the person closest to you for 10 years never mentioned any of this." Security escorted Richard from the building, and Victoria sat alone in her office, staring at the evidence that had seemed so damning an hour ago, and now felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. She pulled the phone records Thomas had compiled as part of his investigation, found the call from Richard's phone at 2 in the morning, traced the receiving number. It was registered to Catherine Thornton, Marcus's wife. Marcus arrived at her summons 20 minutes later. His expression concerned his body language, projecting the same supportive competence he had displayed for a decade. "I heard Richard was arrested. What is happening? Close the door." He complied, and something in his face shifted almost imperceptibly, a microscopic tell that Victoria had learned to recognize in boardrooms and negotiation sessions. The look of someone who had been caught but had not yet decided whether to admit it. "Richard called someone at 2 in the morning, the night before we discovered his office. The call went to a phone registered to your wife." Marcus was silent for a long moment, his careful composure beginning to fracture. "Victoria, I can explain." "Then explain." The confession came slowly dragged out, word by word, like a tumor being excised from healthy tissue. Marcus had known about Richard's activities for 6 months, had been told it was aggressive but legal financial modeling, had convinced himself that everyone in mergers and acquisitions played these kinds of games and that looking too closely would only cause problems. "I did not think it was fraud, not at the beginning. Richard said it was optimization, the kind of thing every company does to make deals look better. I told myself I was being a team player. I told myself that asking too many questions would just make me look paranoid. And when you realized it was more than optimization, by then I was already complicit. I had approved reports that I knew were inaccurate. I had told you the deal was clean when I suspected it was not. Richard made it clear that if he went down, he would take me with him. Victoria stared at the man she had trusted more than almost anyone in her professional life, feeling the architecture of that trust collapsing around her. You chose your career over the truth. You watched me walk into a $3 billion trap and you said nothing. I convinced myself that the end justified the means. That once the acquisition was complete, it would all work out. That the company would be stronger and my silence would be forgotten. She thought about Garrett Calloway, about his refusal to look away from problems even when looking caused pain. Thought about the promise he had made to a dead wife and the way that promise had become the foundation of everything he did. Thought about the difference between people who rationalized their way around inconvenient truths and people who could not. The difference between us is that you learned to look the other way, and I trusted someone who never did. The fire alarm shattered the silence of Sterling Tower at 11:30 that night, a piercing shriek that echoed through empty corridors and sent security teams scrambling to identify the source. Victoria was still in her office, still processing the betrayals of the day when Thomas burst through her door. Fire on 51, mechanical room. Someone triggered the sprinklers, but the smoke is still spreading, and the cameras show a figure entering the space 20 minutes ago. They raced up the stairwell, Victoria refusing to wait for elevators, her lungs burning by the time they reached the 51st floor. Smoke hung in the air, thick enough to require the breathing equipment that firefighters were already distributing. Through the haze, she could see flames licking at computer equipment in the mechanical room, could see someone hunched over a workstation desperately trying to destroy evidence before it could be recovered. Marcus Thornton looked up when the firefighters dragged him away from the burning servers, his face blackened with soot, his eyes wild with a desperation that had stripped away every layer of corporate polish. I told Richard this was a mistake. Burning the evidence only makes it worse. But he is in custody now, and he wanted me to clean up. He wanted me to make sure that if he goes down, everyone goes down together. The fire suppression systems had limited the damage, but the intent was clear. Marcus had been trying to destroy the digital records that connected Richard's fraud to Vanguard Holdings, the proof that the entire Titan acquisition had been engineered to benefit Sterling's competitors at the expense of its shareholders. Victoria watched him being led away in handcuffs, thinking about 10 years of shared lunches and strategy sessions and late nights preparing for board meetings. Thinking about all the moments when Marcus could have spoken up and had chosen silence instead. Thinking about how easy it was to convince yourself that loyalty to your career was the same as loyalty to your conscience. The emergency board meeting convened at 6 the following morning. 17 directors assembled around the mahogany table in the main conference room, their faces reflecting varying degrees of shock and anger and calculation. Victoria presented everything: the hidden office, the falsified models, the connection to Vanguard Holdings, the complicity of both her CFO and COO. Walter Pemberton, the 73-year-old chairman who had been friends with Victoria's father, spoke first. "You are telling us that two of our most senior executives have been working with our primary competitor to manipulate a $3 billion acquisition. That is exactly what I am telling you." Eleanor Blackwood, whose opposition to Victoria had been consistent for 15 years, leaned forward with undisguised hostility. "And you expect us to believe that you had no knowledge of this, that your CFO and COO were committing fraud under your nose, and you noticed nothing. I noticed when a janitor asked questions that my executives should have been asking. I noticed when I stopped accepting comfortable answers and started looking for uncomfortable truths. The vote to cancel the Titan acquisition passed 10-7, with the minority arguing that the evidence might be fabricated, that pulling out of the deal would damage the company more than completing it. Victoria watched the hands rise and fall, knowing that every vote against cancellation was a vote for willful blindness. The financial consequences were immediate and brutal. Sterling Industries stock dropped 18% in the first 24 hours. Another 12% followed when news of the internal investigation leaked to the financial press. 3 major institutional investors publicly called for Victoria's resignation, claiming that her leadership had either been negligent or complicit. The Wall Street Journal ran the story under a headline that made Victoria want to break something. Sterling CEO cancels billion-dollar deal based on evidence from night janitor. They made it sound ridiculous, made it sound like she had lost her mind trusting the observations of a cleaning staff member over the assurances of trained financial professionals. They did not mention that those trained professionals had been lying, did not mention that the janitor had seen what everyone else had been paid not to see, did not mention that sometimes the people with the clearest vision were the ones who had nothing to lose by telling the truth. The reporters found Garrett within 48 hours, tracking him to the elementary school where Lily was completing first grade. They surrounded the entrance like predators around a watering hole, shouting questions at a 6-year-old girl who only wanted to show her father the butterfly drawing she had made in art class. Mr. Calloway, did Sterling Industries pay you for the information you provided? Mr. Calloway, are you concerned about retaliation from the people you exposed? What does your daughter think about her father becoming a corporate whistleblower? Garrett shielded Lily from the cameras, carrying her to the subway entrance with his body between her and the flashing lights. He did not answer their questions, did not engage with their provocations, did not give them anything except the image of a father protecting his child from people who had forgotten that some things mattered more than headlines. That night in their small apartment in Queens, Lily sat on the couch with tears streaming down her face, asking questions that no child should have to ask. Daddy, why were those people yelling at me? Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart, you did not do anything wrong, neither did I. Are they going to take you away like they took Mr. Henderson from upstairs? No, helping stop something bad is different from doing something bad. Nobody is going to take me anywhere. Then why are they asking scary questions? Garrett had no answer for that. Had no way to explain that the world sometimes punished people for doing the right thing, that courage came with consequences, that the path of integrity was rarely the path of ease. He held his daughter until she fell asleep, and then he sat in the darkness of their living room and wondered if the promise he had made to Emma was worth the price Lily might have to pay. Frank Kowalski called at midnight, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had traveled this road before. I heard about the reporters. How are you holding up? Lily is scared. She does not understand why doing the right thing brought scary people to her school. She will understand someday. It took my son 10 years, but he got there eventually. I do not have 10 years, Frank. She is 6. She needs stability and safety and a father who does not bring chaos into her life. The old security guard was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the hard-won wisdom of a man who had sacrificed everything for principle and lived to see the other side. When I reported those cops in Chicago, I thought I was destroying my family. My wife left. My son stopped talking to me. I spent years wondering if the truth was worth the cost. But here is what I learned. Children do not need fathers who are safe. They need fathers they can respect. And they cannot respect a man who sees wrong and stays silent just because speaking up is inconvenient. What if she never forgives me? What if the price of doing right is losing the only person I have left? Then you teach her now. You show her that being a man means standing straight even when the whole world wants you to bend. You give her something to believe in besides comfort and security. Because comfort and security can be taken away in an instant. Character is the only thing that lasts. The news about Richard Ashford came 3 days later, delivered by a federal prosecutor who seemed almost apologetic about having to share it. Richard had been found dead in his cell at the detention center, hanged with a bedsheet in the early hours of the morning. The medical examiner ruled it a suicide. He left a letter addressed to Victoria, passed through official channels, and examined for evidence before being delivered to her office in a sealed envelope. Victoria, the letter began, written in Richard's precise, elegant script. You believe you have found the truth. You have found only the surface. Ask about the night 15 years ago. Ask why your father chose you instead of the person who deserved it. Ask Eleanor Blackwood what she really thinks about the daughter of Harold Sterling. Not everyone is bought with money. Some people are bought with pain. The words landed like stones in deep water, sending ripples through everything Victoria thought she understood. 15 years ago was the year her father had named her as his successor, bypassing 3 other candidates, including Eleanor Blackwood herself. 15 years ago was the year her mother had died, extracting promises on her deathbed about what kind of leader Victoria would become. She pulled old personnel files, reconstructed the timeline of her own ascent, tried to understand what Richard was implying from beyond the grave. The connection to Eleanor was obvious enough. The woman had been passed over for the CEO position and had never forgiven either Harold Sterling or his daughter. But what did that have to do with fraud committed a decade and a half later? Thomas traced the investigation deeper, following threads that led to shell companies and offshore accounts and a web of financial relationships that stretched back years before the Titan acquisition had even been conceived. Richard had been planning this betrayal for longer than anyone had imagined, building his network of allies and accomplices with the patience of someone who measured revenge in decades rather than months. The board meeting that would decide Victoria's fate convened 1 week after Richard's death in the same conference room where she had presented evidence of his crimes. The mood was different now, charged with the electricity of people who smelled blood and were deciding whether to strike. Eleanor Blackwood spoke first, her voice carrying 15 years of accumulated resentment. Victoria Sterling has presided over the most catastrophic breach of corporate governance in this company's history. Her CFO committed fraud under her watch. Her COO helped him. The acquisition that was supposed to cement her legacy has been exposed as a vehicle for corporate espionage, and our stock has lost 30% of its value in less than 2 weeks. Victoria stood to respond, knowing that whatever she said would be measured against the weight of those losses. Everything Eleanor says is accurate, but she leaves out the most important fact. I discovered the fraud and I stopped it. I could have completed the acquisition and let the problems emerge later when they would have been someone else's responsibility. Instead, I chose to face the truth, even though facing it was more expensive than hiding it. You discovered the fraud because a janitor noticed an electrical outlet. Your entire defense rests on the observations of a cleaning staff member. My entire defense rests on the fact that I listened when someone saw something wrong. I did not dismiss him because he lacked credentials. I did not assume that important insights could only come from important people. I trusted my judgment about character over my assumptions about hierarchy. The vote split along predictable lines, with Eleanor's faction voting for Victoria's removal and the moderates splitting between loyalty and self-preservation. When the final count was announced, Victoria felt the floor drop out from beneath her. 9 votes against, 8 in favor, 1 abstention. She had lost. Walter Pemberton delivered the verdict with the gravity of someone who had watched this company grow from nothing and was now watching it tear itself apart. Victoria, the board has voted to request your resignation. You have 72 hours to comply voluntarily. If you refuse, we will proceed with formal termination proceedings. Victoria gathered her notes, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. I will not resign for telling the truth. And if this board removes me for stopping fraud, then you should be certain you can explain that decision to yourselves in 20 years, because I will not be the one living with it. She walked out of the conference room and down the long corridor to her office, past the photographs of her father and the awards that documented her achievements and the empty spaces where her future had been planning to unfold. She had built everything she had on the foundation her parents had laid, had believed that integrity and success could coexist, had trusted that the truth would eventually be recognized as more valuable than convenience. And now she was 72 hours away from losing everything. The night janitor found her standing at her office window, watching the city lights blur through the moisture in her eyes. Garrett entered quietly the way he always did, as if disturbing the silence required permission he had not been granted. I heard about the vote. I am sorry. Victoria did not turn around. You should not be sorry. You did exactly what I asked you to do. You saw what was wrong and you told the truth about it. And now you are paying the price for listening to me. She finally faced him, and Garrett saw something he had not expected in the eyes of one of the most powerful women in American business. Not defeat, not despair, something closer to resolution. My father used to say that failure was not falling down. Failure was deciding to stay on the ground. I have fallen, but I have not decided to stay down yet. What are you going to do? I am going to spend the next 72 hours finding out exactly how deep this goes. Richard's letter mentions something about 15 years ago, about the night my father chose me instead of Eleanor Blackwood. There is something there, something that connects everything that has happened, and I am going to find it. Garrett stepped closer, his voice carrying the quiet intensity of someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep going anyway. Whatever you find, whatever happens next, I want you to know that I do not regret any of this. I spent 3 years promising a dead woman that I would not look away from problems. And watching you face this, watching you choose truth over comfort, even when it costs you everything, that is exactly what keeping a promise looks like. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, some weight she had been carrying for years suddenly finding a place to rest. My mother made me promise something before she died. She made me promise to run this company the way my father built it, with integrity that mattered more than profit, with truth that could not be purchased or buried or explained away. I have been breaking that promise for years, one compromise at a time. But maybe with 72 hours left, I can start keeping it again. Then we should probably get started. They worked through the night, Victoria and Garrett and Thomas Reeves, digging through 15 years of corporate history, looking for the thread that connected Richard's betrayal to Eleanor's resentment to the night Harold Sterling had chosen his daughter over everyone else. And somewhere in the darkness of Sterling Tower, the truth was waiting to be found. Eleanor Blackwood arrived at Victoria's penthouse unannounced, carrying a wooden box that looked older than the building itself. It was 40 hours into the 72-hour countdown, and Victoria had spent most of that time excavating 15 years of corporate history, looking for connections she had never thought to question. The woman who had voted against her, who had spent 15 years opposing her at every turn, who had been passed over for the CEO position and had never hidden her resentment, stood in Victoria's doorway with an expression that did not match anything in their shared history. I voted to remove you because I thought you were making the same mistake your mother made. Victoria stepped back, allowing Eleanor to enter, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected development. You knew my mother, Margaret Sterling, and I were friends for 20 years before you were born. We started at this company together, two young women trying to prove we belonged in a world that did not want us. She was the smartest person I ever met and the most stubborn and the only one who ever understood what it cost to be a woman in this industry. Eleanor set the wooden box on Victoria's coffee table and sat down without being invited, her movements carrying the weight of someone who had been holding something heavy for far too long. 15 years ago, your mother was dying. Cancer had spread too far to stop, and she knew she only had weeks left. She called me to her hospital bed and asked me to promise her something. She asked me to watch over you, to make sure you did not lose yourself in the process of running this company. And she asked me to step aside so that Harold could choose you without opposition. Victoria sank into the chair across from Eleanor, her understanding of the past rearranging itself around this new information. You gave up the CEO position because my mother asked you to. I gave it up because Margaret convinced me that you were the only one who would keep this company from becoming everything we hated. She said the others would compromise too easily, would rationalize too quickly, would choose profit over principle when the pressure came. She believed you were different, and you have spent 15 years testing that belief. Every vote against me, every challenge in board meetings, every public criticism. Eleanor's expression shifted, something almost like respect emerging from the lines of her face. I needed to know if Margaret was right about you, if you would bend under pressure or hold your ground. For 15 years, I watched you make compromises. I did not like decisions. I questioned choices that seemed to prioritize expediency over integrity. And I wondered if Margaret had been wrong. What changed Richard Ashford's death? The letter he left you. And the fact that when everything fell apart, you did not try to cover it up or explain it away. You stood in front of the board and took responsibility for what happened under your watch, even though you were the one who stopped it. Eleanor opened the wooden box, revealing a stack of letters bound with faded ribbon handwriting that Victoria recognized from birthday cards and hospital notes, and the last message her mother had ever written. Margaret sent me letters throughout her illness. She wrote about you constantly, about her fears for your future and her hopes for what you might become. And she wrote one letter that she asked me to give you only if I ever became certain that you were the person she believed you could be. Victoria's hands trembled as she accepted the envelope. Eleanor held out her mother's handwriting, spelling her name in ink that had faded over 15 years of waiting. The letter inside was short, the words of a dying woman who had limited time and unlimited things to say. My dearest Victoria, if you are reading this, then Eleanor believes you have become the leader I always knew you could be. That means you have faced something terrible and chosen truth over safety, principle over convenience, integrity over comfort. I want you to know that I chose you not because you were my daughter, but because you were the only one who would not bend. Your father built this company on the belief that success without integrity was not success at all. I need you to protect that belief even when protecting it costs you everything. The hardest part of leadership is not making difficult decisions. It is living with them afterward. I know you will face moments when the right choice seems impossible, when the price of truth seems too high to pay. In those moments, remember that I believed in you. Remember that some things matter more than winning. I love you. I have always loved you, and I am proud of whoever you have become. Your mother, Margaret Victoria, read the letter 3 times before she could speak, tears falling onto paper that had waited 15 years to deliver its message. She believed in me. Even then, even before I had done anything to prove it, she believed I would not bend. Eleanor's voice carried the echo of decades spent watching and waiting. I did not vote to remove you because I thought you had failed. I voted to see what you would do when everything was taken away. Whether you would fight or fold. Whether you would cling to the position or stand for the principle. I needed to know if you were really Margaret's daughter. And now I have 3 votes I can change. 3 board members who followed my lead because they trust my judgment. If you can show me that you have a plan to move forward, a way to rebuild what has been damaged, I will bring them to your side. Victoria thought about Garrett Calloway, about his proposal for a system that would democratize oversight, about his insistence that he did not want to become a corporate executive because becoming one would require him to stop being the person who noticed what others missed. I have someone I want you to meet. The meeting happened the next morning in a borrowed conference room in Midtown that had no connection to Sterling Industries or its compromised security systems. Eleanor arrived first, her skepticism evident in every line of her body. Garrett came directly from his night shift, still wearing his uniform, carrying himself with the same quiet dignity that had characterized every interaction Victoria had witnessed. Eleanor studied him for a long moment before speaking. You are the janitor who noticed the electrical outlet. I am the person who could not look away from something that did not add up. The janitor part is just how I pay my rent. Victoria explained the situation quickly. The board vote, the 72-hour deadline, the need to demonstrate a path forward that would convince skeptical directors that keeping her was better than removing her. Mr. Calloway has a proposal for how to prevent something like this from happening again. I want you to hear it. Garrett straightened slightly, the unconscious posture of someone preparing to defend something he believed in. The problem with corporate oversight is that it relies on people with power to notice problems that people with power benefit from ignoring. The executives who should be asking questions have careers that depend on not asking them. The board members who should be demanding answers have relationships that make demanding them uncomfortable. The system is designed to catch mistakes from the bottom, not corruption from the top. Eleanor's expression shifted from skepticism to something closer to interest. And your solution, create a parallel system. Hello. An anonymous reporting channel where anyone in the company, from the mailroom to the executive suite, can flag inconsistencies without fear of retaliation. Staff it with people who have no stake in the corporate hierarchy, people whose job is specifically to ask uncomfortable questions. Make it report directly to the board, completely independent of executive control. You are describing a professional class of corporate skeptics. I am describing a system where noticing something wrong does not require becoming important enough for your observations to matter. Where a janitor who sees an electrical outlet in the wrong place can report it through channels that will actually investigate instead of dismissing it because the source lacks credentials. Eleanor turned to Victoria, her assessment complete. He is not wrong. Every major corporate scandal of the past 20 years happened because people who noticed problems were ignored or silenced. Creating a formal mechanism for that kind of observation could have prevented most of them. That is exactly what I intend to propose to the board, not just as damage control, but as genuine reform, a way to ensure that what happened with Richard and Marcus cannot happen again. And what role would Mr. Calloway play in this system? Garrett answered before Victoria could. I do not want a title or an office or a seat at the executive table. I want to keep doing what I have been doing, noticing things that do not add up and telling someone who will listen. If you create this system, you can hire people with degrees and credentials to run it. My contribution was pointing out that it needed to exist. Eleanor studied him for another long moment, her expression unreadable. Your mother would have liked him, Victoria. He reminds me of her. Stubborn about principle, unimpressed by hierarchy, willing to sacrifice advancement for integrity. Then you will support me at the board meeting. I will do more than support you. I will make certain you win. The final board meeting convened with 20 hours remaining on Victoria's deadline. 17 directors took their seats around the mahogany table, most of them expecting to witness the formal end of the Sterling family's control over the company Harold had built from nothing. Victoria stood alone at the head of the table, no legal team behind her, no executive allies at her side. The evidence she had compiled over the past 70 hours was arranged in folders, at each seat documentation that told a story far more complex than the one the board had been prepared to hear. She began with the numbers, the language they all understood best. Financial analysis showing that the Titan acquisition, had it been completed, would have cost the company an estimated $1.8 billion when the fraud was eventually discovered. Projections demonstrating that the decision to cancel, while painful in the short term, had protected shareholders from catastrophic losses that would have dwarfed the current stock decline. The damage we have suffered is approximately $500 million in market value. The damage we avoided is more than 3 times that amount. I did not destroy this company by canceling the acquisition. I saved it, Eleanor Blackwood spoke next, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been in this room longer than most of the current directors had been in business. I have opposed Victoria Sterling on many occasions over the past 15 years. I have questioned her judgment, challenged her decisions, and voted against her initiatives when I believed she was wrong. But I have never questioned her integrity. And the evidence presented here demonstrates that her integrity is exactly what protected this company from disaster. 2 other directors, longtime allies of Eleanor, who had followed her lead in the original vote, announced their changed positions. The mathematics of the room began to shift. Victoria presented the reform proposal next, outlining the anonymous reporting system, the independent oversight mechanism, the structural changes designed to prevent future betrayals from taking root. She described how the idea had originated not with expensive consultants or seasoned executives, but with a night janitor who had refused to accept that noticing problems was above his pay grade. The person who saved this company was not someone with an MBA or a corner office. He was someone who believed that paying attention to details mattered more than respecting hierarchies. The system I am proposing will ensure that the next person who notices something wrong will have a formal channel for their observations instead of having to hope that someone in power will take them seriously. The vote, when it came, split the room down the middle. One by one, directors announced their positions, the count seesawing between victory and defeat. Walter Pemberton called for the final tally with the gravity of someone who understood that this moment would define the company's future. 9 votes to retain Victoria Sterling as CEO. 8 votes for removal. Victoria had won by a single vote. The year that followed was a testament to the power of systems designed by people who understood their necessity. The anonymous reporting channel received over 200 submissions in its first 6 months, most of them minor concerns that were quickly addressed. Several of them significant issues that would have grown into major problems without early intervention. The first major success came from an observation submitted by a warehouse worker who noticed inventory discrepancies that did not match the shipping records. Investigation revealed a small but systematic fraud in the procurement department, caught early enough that the damage was measured in tens of thousands rather than millions. The contrast with the Richard Ashford situation was obvious to everyone. The same kind of attention to detail that had exposed the CFO's betrayal was now being channeled through formal mechanisms instead of depending on chance. Garrett Calloway accepted a position as Special Advisor for Operational Oversight, a title that sounded important, but came with no office, no direct reports, and no requirement to attend meetings in suits. His job was to continue doing what he had always done, walking the building at night, noticing things that others missed, reporting his observations through the same channels available to any other employee. The difference was that now those observations went somewhere instead of being dismissed as not his concern. He kept his night janitor position as well, refusing offers to move to day shifts or supervisory roles. The nights were when the building revealed its true self, when systems operated without performance and people moved without audiences. If he wanted to understand what was really happening in Sterling Tower, he needed to be there when no one thought anyone was watching. The stock recovered, gradually climbing back toward pre-crisis levels as investors recognized that the company's response to fraud had been exactly what responsible governance should look like. Business publications that had mocked Victoria for trusting a janitor's observations began running features on the innovative oversight system she had implemented, crediting her vision for corporate reform that other companies were beginning to emulate. Frank Kowalski retired at the end of the year, his last shift ending with a small ceremony in the security office where he had spent 2 decades watching over the building and the people inside it. Garrett was there along with Victoria and Thomas Reeves and a handful of other employees who had come to understand what the old security guard represented. Frank's final words to Garrett carried the weight of a torch being passed. I spent my whole career watching people get away with things because nobody wanted to make trouble. You proved that making trouble is sometimes the only way to make things right. Keep doing what you are doing, Calloway. This building needs people who cannot look away. The connection between Victoria and Garrett evolved slowly the way trust always does when it is built on something more substantial than convenience. They spoke regularly professional conversations about building operations and system improvements, but also something deeper conversations about choices and consequences and the price of living according to principle. Victoria found herself sleeping better, the insomnia that had plagued her for 5 years finally beginning to release its grip. She did not know if it was the resolution of the crisis or something else, something connected to knowing that there was someone in her orbit who understood what it meant to choose truth over comfort. On a Friday evening in late autumn, Garrett stopped by her office after completing his rounds. The building was quiet, most employees having left hours ago, the kind of silence that invited honesty. The auxiliary system on 32 is running outside normal parameters. Probably just a sensor malfunction, but I wanted you to know. Victoria smiled, a genuine expression that would have surprised anyone who had known her a year ago. I will have engineering check it first thing tomorrow. Garrett nodded but did not leave something unspoken hanging in the air between them. Lily asked about you. She wanted to know why you stopped coming to the park. I did not want to intrude. You and Lily have your own life. I did not think it was appropriate for me to insert myself into it. Victoria, you spent a year fighting to save a company because you believed in integrity. You trusted a janitor's observations when everyone told you he was beneath your notice. You are not intruding. You are the first adult Lily has met who treats her like a person instead of an inconvenience. She is a remarkable child. She is also asking questions I do not know how to answer. She wants to know if you are lonely. She says people who are lonely need friends, and she wants to be your friend. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, the armor she had worn for so long suddenly feeling less necessary. I am not very good at friendship. I have spent so long choosing career over connection that I have forgotten how to let people in. Then maybe you could learn together. Lily lost her mother before she was old enough to remember what having a mother meant. You lost yourself somewhere along the way to building an empire. Maybe learning how to connect is something neither of you should have to do alone. The silence stretched between them, comfortable rather than awkward, the quiet of two people who had stopped performing and started being present. What would that look like, learning together? It would look like Sunday lunch at our apartment. Lily is practicing making sandwiches. Her technique is improving, though I cannot promise the results will be edible. She wants an important guest to try them. Victoria laughed, a sound she barely recognized as coming from herself. 1 o'clock, 1 o'clock. Bring patience and possibly antacids. The following Sunday, Victoria stood outside a modest apartment building in Queens, holding a bottle of wine that cost more than a month of Garrett's rent, and feeling more nervous than she had before any board meeting or shareholder presentation. Lily answered the door, her face lighting up with the unfiltered joy that only children can produce. Ms. Sterling, you came. I told Daddy you would come. Come see what I made for you. The apartment was small but immaculate, every surface reflecting the care of someone who took pride in maintaining what he had. Photographs of Emma occupied a place of honor on a bookshelf, a reminder of the woman whose absence had shaped everything that followed. But next to those photographs, Victoria noticed something new. A picture from the park, Garrett and Lily and Victoria herself, all three of them, laughing at something she could not remember. Lily led her to the kitchen where a construction paper card waited on the counter, elaborate crayon drawings covering both sides. I made this for you. Daddy helped with the words, but I did all the pictures myself. Victoria opened the card and found herself looking at a crayon rendering of Sterling Tower Hall and bright windows glowing like stars. At the base of the building stood two figures, one in a business suit, one holding a mop. Above them, in careful letters that Lily had clearly practiced many times, were words that made Victoria's throat tighten. Two people who keep promises. Lily explained the drawing with the earnest seriousness of a child sharing something important. Daddy says you and him work together to keep the building safe. Like heroes in my books, but without dragons. Just grown-ups who do bad things. Victoria knelt to meet Lily at eye level, holding the card like it was made of precious metal rather than paper and crayon. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Daddy says you did not have anyone to make you pictures before. So I decided I would make you one. Because everyone needs someone to see them. Garrett appeared in the kitchen doorway, watching the exchange with an expression that Victoria had never seen on his face before. Something soft, something hopeful. Lily has been planning in that card for 2 weeks. She wanted it to be perfect. It is perfect. Absolutely perfect. They ate lunch together, sandwiches that were enthusiastically made, if imperfectly constructed conversation that ranged from butterflies to business ethics to the best flavor of ice cream. Victoria found herself laughing more than she had in years, found herself relaxing in a way that boardrooms and executive suites had never permitted. After lunch, Lily insisted on showing Victoria her butterfly book, and the three of them sat on the small couch, Lily in the middle, turning pages and explaining each species with the authority of a 6-year-old expert. When it was time to leave, Lily hugged Victoria with the fierce intensity of a child who had decided something important. You are going to come back, right? Daddy says you are very busy, but I think you should come back. Victoria looked at Garrett over his daughter's head, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. I would like that very much. If it is okay with your daddy. Garrett nodded, something unspoken passing between them. It is more than okay. That night, Victoria stood at the window of her penthouse looking out at the city she had conquered and the building that bore her family's name. On the wall behind her, newly framed, hung Lily's card positioned next to the photograph of her father that had occupied that space alone for 15 years. Her phone buzzed. Garrett, Lily wanted me to tell you that today was the best Sunday she can remember. She asked if you could come back next week. Victoria smiled at her reflection in the glass, at the woman who had spent 45 years building walls and was finally learning to let someone through. Tell her I will be there. Same time. And tell her I am bringing ingredients for cookies. Her sandwiches were perfect, but I think we should expand her culinary repertoire. She is going to be thrilled. Fair warning, she will probably insist on teaching you rather than the other way around. I am counting on it. Victoria ended the call and stood in the silence of her expensive, empty apartment, thinking about everything she had gained and lost and found again over the past year. She thought about her mother's letter, about the belief that had waited 15 years to be delivered. She thought about her father's legacy, about the company built on integrity that she had almost lost and had fought to save. She thought about promises made to ghosts and promises made to the living, about the difference between people who bent under pressure and people who stood straight even when the whole world wanted them to fold. And she thought about a janitor who had given his jacket to a stranger on a cold night, who had whispered vows to a dead wife and kept them for a living daughter, who had noticed an electrical outlet that everyone else had overlooked and had refused to accept that it was not his concern. Some promises were made in boardrooms and contracts written in legal language and enforced by courts. But the promises that mattered most were the ones made in the dark, when no one was watching, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose. Victoria had spent her life making the first kind of promise. Garrett had taught her the value of the second. The lights of Sterling Tower glowed through the night, a beacon in the Manhattan skyline guarding a city that never slept. Somewhere inside, a night janitor was walking empty corridors, paying attention to details that others dismissed, keeping a promise that had become the architecture of his soul. And somewhere in Queens, a small girl was sleeping with a butterfly book clutched to her chest, dreaming about the tall woman who had listened to her stories and laughed at her jokes and promised to come back next Sunday. Promises were not made for convenience. They were made for the moments when keeping them cost something real. That was when they mattered. That was when they meant anything at all. Victoria understood that now. Understood it in a way she never had before in all her years of contracts and negotiations and corporate maneuvering. She picked up her phone and sent one last message to Garrett. Thank you for seeing something in me that I had forgotten was there. For teaching me that promises are not just words, for giving me a reason to learn how to keep them. The reply came almost immediately. Emma used to say that we become what we practice. You practiced integrity when it would have been easier to compromise. You practiced truth when lies would have cost less. You practiced caring when indifference was safer. Whatever you have become, you earned it. Victoria read the message twice, then put down her phone and looked out at the city one more time. Tomorrow there would be meetings and decisions and the endless machinery of corporate leadership. But there would also be something else. There would be a system that listened to janitors and warehouse workers and receptionists who noticed things that did not add up. There would be a company that had learned painfully that integrity was worth more than convenience. And there would be a Sunday lunch to look forward to with a 6-year-old chef and her father in a small apartment where the most valuable currency was attention and the greatest gift was presence. Some people built empires out of money and power and the accumulation of things that could be measured and counted. Victoria Sterling had finally learned to build something else, something that could not be valued on a balance sheet or traded on an exchange or lost in a market crash. She had learned to build trust. And trust, it turned out, was the only foundation that could survive any storm. The night stretched on toward morning, and somewhere in the building that bore her name, a man who had lost everything was keeping a promise to a woman who was gone, and in doing so was teaching everyone around him what it meant to be worthy of being believed. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was what mattered in the end. Not the victories, not the defeats. Not the money gained or lost or counted, just the promises and the courage to keep them.